Okay, so imagine a book so ruthless, so incredibly smart, that it could literally build an empire from scratch. Today, we're cracking open Kautilya's Arthashastra, an ancient Indian playbook for power that honestly makes Machiavelli's The Prince look like a children's story.
To really get what makes the Arthashastra so groundbreaking, you gotta go back in time with me. We're talking 6th century BCE India. And you need to forget any idea of a single unified country. Picture this instead, a chaotic landscape of warring kingdoms, all in a constant fight for survival. It was a total power vacuum, just waiting for someone with a real plan.
I mean, the Indian subcontinent back then was like a shattered mirror. It was broken into at least 16 major kingdoms, these Mahajanapadas. And look, this was not some friendly competition. This was a brutal, nonstop struggle for land, for resources, for pure dominance. Without any central power, it was literally every kingdom for itself. And all of this internal fighting, well, it was like a dinner bell for foreign powers. The Persians, under kings like Cyrus and Darius, they just marched right in, carving off huge pieces of the subcontinent for themselves. And then came Alexander the Great. These invasions weren't just simple defeats. They were a massive wake-up call. They proved beyond a doubt that a divided India was a conquerable India. So, out of all this chaos, our main character finally steps onto the scene. And he's not a king. He's not a general. He's a scholar with a mind like a steel trap. And, as it turns out, a serious grudge. This guy would become the architect of an entire empire. The story behind it is just incredible. So, legend has it that this scholar, Chanakya, was publicly humiliated by the king of Magadha, a really arrogant guy named Dhanananda. Now, Chanakya didn't just get mad. No, he untied his hair right then and there and made a vow that would change history. He would not rest, would not even tie his hair back until the entire Nanda dynasty was completely destroyed. You'll hear a few names for him, and they each kind of tell a part of his story. He was born Vishnugupta. He was called Chanakya, but the name that really sticks, the one that defines him, is Kautilya, which means the cunning one. And that name tells you everything you need to know about his methods. They were complex, they were strategic, and yeah, when they needed to be, they were absolutely ruthless. And his plan, wow, it was nothing short of breathtaking. He finds this promising young kid, Chandragupt Maurya, and for almost a decade, he basically forges him into a weapon. He taught him everything: warfare, economics, how to run a government, and all the shady, dark arts of politics. All of it was to fulfill that one single burning vow. So what exactly was this master plan he was teaching? Well, it wasn't just a few lessons here and there. Kautilya literally wrote the book on it. He created a manual, a step-by-step guide on how to seize power, how to hold on to it, and how to wield it. And that book was the Arthashastra. Let's just be clear about the scale here for a second. This is not some short pamphlet you can read in an afternoon. The Arthashastra is a monster of a text. We're talking 15 books, 160 chapters. It's less of a guide and more of a complete encyclopedia for how to run an empire, covering just about every topic you could possibly imagine. You know, the title itself is pretty fascinating. If you hear Arthashastra today, people usually translate it as economics. But Kautilya's vision was way, way bigger than that. For him, it was the science of acquiring and protecting the earth. In other words, the complete, no-holds-barred art of running a state. All right, so let's actually peek inside this ancient playbook. What are some of the core ideas in here? What's in this toolkit for power? I gotta warn you, some of this stuff is pretty controversial. Okay, first up, spies. Kautilya was absolutely obsessed with intelligence. He spends huge parts of the book detailing how to build this massive network of spies. For him, a king who couldn't see what was going on with his enemies and even with his own people was basically blind and just waiting to be taken out. These agents were the king's eyes and ears, absolutely essential. Now, when it came to dealing with other kingdoms, Kautilya was a stone-cold pragmatist. His whole foreign policy was basically a toolbox with 6 different options. See, a king wasn't bound by things like honor or loyalty. No, you just choose the tool that works best for the state right now. Is your neighbor stronger than you? You make peace. Are they weak but have a lot of stuff you want? You go to war. It's just a chillingly practical approach to diplomacy. And the sheer scope of this book is just staggering. It's so much more than spies and wars. The Arthashastra is a detailed blueprint for a fully functioning state,
It covers everything from how to collect taxes and manage the economy, to how to set up a justice system, how to provide relief during a famine, and even how to regulate the sale of liquor. The level of detail is just wild.
So, here's the billion-dollar question. Did this crazy, audacious plan actually work? Well, the answer is a resounding yes. But this is where the story takes a really fascinating turn, and it leads to a modern historical mystery that people are still arguing about today. So yeah, armed with Kautilya's ruthless playbook, Chandragupta didn't just overthrow the Nanda dynasty, he totally annihilated it, fulfilling his mentor's vow. He then turned around and drove back the successor to Alexander the Great, and went on to forge the first great Indian empire. He unified the subcontinent in a way no one ever had before. For centuries, nobody questioned the story. It was just accepted fact. Kautilya wrote the book. But then, in the 20th century, the text was rediscovered and scholars really started looking at it closely. And they started poking holes in the legend. This kicked off a huge historical debate that is still very much alive. So the whole debate basically boils down to this. On the one hand, you have a mountain of traditional sources. We're talking Buddhist texts, Jain texts, Puranic texts, and they all say Kautilya was Chandragupta's chief minister. But on the other hand, there's a huge, glaring problem. The arthashastra itself never once mentions Chandragupta, the Mauryan Empire, or even its capital city. It's a classic standoff between centuries of tradition and the cold, hard text itself. But, in the end, who actually wrote it might not be the most important question. Whether it was the work of one brilliant, vengeful guy, or maybe a whole school of thinkers over generations, the impact of the arthashastra is just undeniable. It's still one of the world's most important and provocative texts on the very nature of power. And this right here, this is the core philosophy of the whole book. The arthashastra is not about morality. It's not about ethics in the way we usually think about them. It's about one thing and one thing only: effectiveness. The number one goal is the security and prosperity of the state. And Kautilya argues that any means you use to achieve that goal are not just acceptable, they're essential. Ultimately, the arthashastra is like a mirror. It forces us to look at our own ideas about power, about ethics, about leadership. And it makes us ask some really uncomfortable questions, right? What is the real purpose of a government? And what are we as a people willing to sacrifice to feel secure? More than 2,000 years later, this ancient playbook is still as relevant and honestly, as unsettling as it's ever been. So what do you think?